Hello and welcome again to the Doctors Who podcast. My name is Chris.
I'm Chip.
I'm Brian.
And today we are going to be continuing our discussion of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So we've kind of broken this out into parts.
Yeah.
The first part we kind of talked about the innkeeper Kvothe.
Mm-hmm.
I think we even got into the chronicler and Bast and even Kvothe as a child.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And then the second episode is really where things went completely off the rail for Kvothe. Ben, his tutor and probably his best friend, left his traveling troupe.
Mm-hmm.
He went to collect firewood, and when he came back, his entire troop had been slaughtered, turns out, by the Chandrian.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kvothe at that point was alone, and
kind of went feral
he
and
went
lived in the woods.
feral and lived in the woods before going
He
into...
broke all the strings on his lute.
Right.
He needed new lute strings.
Yeah.
Lute strings was what drove him into
Tarbean.
Tarbean.
Yep.
Right. And he basically was a street urchin. And so today we are going to be looking at what has happened from that perspective, or from that time on.
Yes, I think he'd been on the streets for some time in the last discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it ended where he'd heard about this man telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah,
I can't remember
it was
what,
something
somewhere
like,
in the waterfront.
Yeah, if
area.
you ask for a story he doesn't know, you get a talent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first...
And I should point out for the listeners that we are starting on chapter 26.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
Good idea.
And we go
Cool.
all the way through 39 here.
39.
So we'll not, at least not intentionally spoil anything after chapter 39.
Correct. Okay.
There's some foreshadowing in there. So
Mhm.
There is. So the first area we're going to cover, when we've broken this out into three main sections, is what we're calling Scarpi and the story of Lanray. I may or may not be pronouncing that correctly.
I always said Lanray.
Okay.
So
Brian, what did you say?
Lanray.
Great. Good job.
I'm good with that.
Cool.
Okay.
So, like we said, he heard a story or a tale of a man who basically told stories. That's what he did.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And if you asked for a story he didn't know, you got some coin out of it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this kind of stirred something in Kvothe, because he'd been primal instinct, just surviving to this point.
Yeah,
and
he
he's
basically, I think when we talked about it the last time, he'd shut all these doors in his mind to different things that he knew. He basically closed himself off, so he wasn't telling stories, he wasn't playing music, he wasn't practicing sympathy or magic, and when he heard about this storyteller, it seemed to awaken something in him, that there was an urge to go. But because of the part of town it was in, he was a little wary of going and had to make a decision on whether he would or not.
Because it was in a part of town where the kid who broke his lute.
Yeah, Pike.
Mm-hmm.
I believe.
Yeah, and they'd had some additional run-ins that didn't end well.
And Kvothe kind of had his revenge on Pike, and they'd kind of gone back and forth. So it was
he
somewhat
tried
dangerous.
to set him on fire.
He tried to
didn't
kill him.
Yeah. Which I think we'll probably come back to at some point, because he obviously has the ability to kill.
Yeah, or he has the will or the fortitude, I guess, to carry it out, because he did attempt it and lit the kid on fire, and I think he burned all his possessions, didn't he, or Pike's possessions?
Yes, he did.
Mm-hmm.
He basically set fire to his...
He destroyed everything that was meaningful to him, because he destroyed his father's loot, and so.
But he decides to go, and he decides to listen to Scarpi, and Scarpi asks for a story, and Kvothe asks for the story of Lanray.
Yep.
That was the story his father was working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it talks about... Oh, I'm gonna get this wrong, but basically Lanray was a warrior, and his
wife was
lover,
Lyra.
wife Lyra was always by his side. He died, and she was able to basically resurrect him.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as Lanre was alive, these people had hope.
Yep.
And there was Celitos, I believe, was the man's name.
Yeah. I said Celitos.
Celitos.
Mm-hmm. But it was something like that.
Lanre betrayed Celitos.
Celitos,
sure. And my brain just left me. I hate it when that happens. But he basically betrayed Celitos as well as the free people involved in this war, right? And so, as punishment, Celitos basically shrouded him in shadow and exiled him and named him, of all things, Haliax. Which, if we go back to our previous episode, was the name of the Chandrian overlord, I guess, that was protecting Cinder and the others.
Yep. And then he's the one that called them back at some point.
Right. Excuse me. But it didn't connect immediately for Kvothe.
No,
because he had, like you said, all of these doors were shut. He really closed himself off from everything that had happened in his life prior to Tarbean, and he was just in base survival mode. So, I think it came to him the next day, didn't it?
I believe it started to, because then he went back to listen to Scarpy again.
Right.
And that's when he talked about, wasn't it the Emir and some other stuff, but basically then, wasn't it the Inquisition, that Telu priest came in and arrested Scarpy for heresy.
Right. But something interesting happens here. Because everybody pretty much cuts and runs immediately when these guys show up. But Kvothe stays.
Yeah.
And as Scarpy is being let out, I mean, he does it. I mean, he acts as though he has no care in the world.
Nope.
Like this is just an everyday occurrence, which
I
is
think
pretty
he says
incredible.
he had friends in the priesthood that would protect. He'd be fine.
Yeah.
And he told Kvothe to run, but I think where you're going is that he called Kvothe by name.
Yes.
And Kvothe had never given him his name.
Right.
And the naming of things is very important to this whole story.
Absolutely.
So.
And that begins kind of the awakening process. At this point is kind of the focal point of this portion of the book where he really is kind of snapping out of, his existence in Tarbean. He's been there for 3 years?
I think it was 3 years.
And so he's really kind of, at this point, ready to move on. And I think this was his call to action.
And I think it started, he was so upset that he used one of Ben's mental exercises that he was taught to kind of just to calm himself down because he was so distraught. And that's what kind of started that process of going through and opening these doors and really just and all of these things started flooding back.
Yeah, because didn't he get in? He fled back to his rooftop hiding place and he started to go through these exercises. And I think he got his book out even and started looking at rhetoric and logic. And he had opened that in 3 years, we assume.
Right. But he recalled something. Let me pull it up here. Because Haliax had said something before they departed his parents' camp. He said, "Who keeps you safe from the Emir, the singers, the scythe, from all that would harm you in the world?" And what that told Kvothe was, the Chandrian have enemies. They not past tense. Who keeps you safe? And that, I think, is kind of the turning point because he made that conscious decision. If I am going to find out who the enemies of the Chandrian are, I'm not going to do it here on my rooftop.
Right.
So that's kind of the fork in the road. I don't know if that's the right word.
Well, it really makes him realize that this is not just something in his past, but people are there are actually people like him that are fighting against them right now. Again, that call to action.
Yeah. So But you mentioned that he opened the book
Mm-hmm.
and he looked at it, but I think he opened it and he realized this is my ticket out, because if I sell this, I have enough to get out of here.
With his goal being to get to the university.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where the answers are, and that's where his next steps are in his mind, right? So, but what he does is actually pretty clever, because he goes and he pawns the book.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And he says,
Wasn't it at the broken binding?
the broken binding, yeah.
So then, that's interesting, because that was there was kind of a double meaning there, because it's the name of the bookstore, but it's also what happened in his mind is these bindings that were holding all this information in have been broken, and these memories are starting to come back to him, and he's starting to formulate his plan as to where he's going to go from here and what he wants to do next. And he's just been in kind of a holding pattern for 3 years.
But he goes in, and this is kind of the first step of his opening of the doors, where he goes in and tries to sell this book, and at first, he asks to sell it with the option to buy it back in a month. And as he's in the store, he asks for a receipt because he wants to prove that he can buy the book back. And the store owner's like, haha, I'm going to show you. So he gave him a dummy receipt.
Yeah.
But what was great about that interaction was that was his first time where I thought the dialogue came back to his former self. He was able to open up the door of his speech. He was able to use his words to not only take control of the situation, but to impress other people.
Right.
And he was able to convince the bookseller, the book buyer in this case, that not only would Kvothe sell the book, but then he could buy the book back in a month at pennies on the...
Yeah, I think he wrote it
for his own talent.
He sold it for 2 talents, but I think it was like 2
Buy it back
jots
for
or
2
whatever
jots,
the difference
Yep.
is, or silver jots.
So, but to your point, excuse me. I had a point. What did we say this was? 9%? 9.5%?
9.5%.
Yeah.
You'll find out on Wednesday.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, worth a quick plug that we're going to be releasing next week on Wednesday the episode where we review this beer, Central Waters Vanilla Bean Stout. So you can check that out next week. My thought is gone. So why don't we just keep moving on? But with the money he gets from the book, he is able to get himself a bath.
Cleaned up.
And
don't forget the egg, warm bread, and ham breakfast.
Yes,
I saw that and
yeah,
I was like, man, I'm hungry for
Yeah.
breakfast now.
Yeah. And
But then he goes to buy clothes, but he didn't want to go buy clothes in the rags
in
that he was wearing.
after
So
he just took
he
his shower or his bath.
basically improvised this situation where he pretended to be
a
noble son
who
was with
had his clothes stolen by a prostitute.
Yeah.
And so he was naked running through town and had to buy clothes and really kind of showed how despicable like a noble son can be, which is kind of foreshadowing for someone he'll meet at the university. And
he said there's no greater force than a
destructive force
than a noble son, which is probably
true.
Very true.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't really have that caste system anymore, but I can see
I
that, and I've
some
read
like rich bratty kids
and seen enough that I can get that. So, but he gets his clothes and he goes back to the inn because I think he offered to like wash dishes or something, right?
Yep.
And
clean the hearth
and clean the hearth and all this.
He did.
And the innkeeper was like, "You don't want to do this, do you?" He basically threw him a bone. He's like, "You're good."
Yep.
But the last thing before he left was he went back to Trappist's place.
Yep.
Basically to say goodbye.
Did he do that before he got his shoes?
He did.
Yes.
Okay.
He did. Yes, I think so.
I think you're right. 'Cause he did that when he was waiting for the caravan. Yeah. But...
Right. Yeah. But none of the kids recognized him, but Trappist recognizes him immediately.
And doesn't treat him any differently.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Boy, what a great
Which
character.
is so cool, right?
Yeah, he just was basically hold these or carry this.
And, the goodbye was even cut short because he was taking care of a girl that was needing him. So, what a great character. I liked this character a lot.
Yeah.
So at this point, continuing his quest to go towards the university, his next step is to find a way to get to the university. So he ends up finding a caravan that's heading northward.
Yep.
And they're going to be leaving in 2 hours. And it kind of prompts... It really kind of in motion the rest of the book. Like, again, Rothfuss does a great job of moving the story along.
Yeah.
He gives you a lot of details, but he doesn't get hung up on the details. He keeps the story moving.
And the details seem important, too.
They do.
So it's not like just exposition for exposition's sake. There's a lot of stuff in the stories within the story that all are leading towards some sort of conclusion.
Mm-hmm. But even like the rich dialogue, and I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but the patriarch of the caravan, just the argument of laying out the rules. If you are late, then we will leave you behind. If you do not like the food, we will leave you behind. If you look at that girl, I'm going to hurt you.
All right, so we're going to just pause for a second because we're having some buffering issues. And also, just in the interest of time, we're about 15.
Each week.
Mm-hmm. You need a 100-foot Ethernet cable.
Okay. So, viewers are going to experience buffering because this is clearly not working. That makes me sad.
So are we still live or are we paused?
Well, I mean, it's still kind of going, but people are just going to get choppiness.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So, if you're still listening and watching, we're aware that your experience sucks. I don't have a good... solution for this. But we're going to...
By the next second, it's so variable.
Okay, we might be back now. Or we're thinking about coming back now.
Okay.
I think we're back now.
Hey, we're back.
We appear to be back.
Okay.
Chip, when was the last time you drank something? Was it recent?
About 3 or 4 seconds ago.
Okay,
That seems pretty recent.
great. We are going to pretend
That we didn't have buffering issues.
that we didn't have buffering issues.
And just continue the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So he gets on his merchant. He finds a merchant wagon, and
Mhm.
that is his ticket out of here.
Yeah. Well, he finds a pair of shoes and then he gets on the merchant wagon.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I thought the shoes was just a nice little
It was.
aside.
Yeah.
Well, that was a sign of growth. I thought the fact that he could have taken the shoes for free, but ended up paying 2 pennies
Well,
for it.
he left 2 pennies without, he just,
Yeah.
gave them. You
Yep.
know, I felt it was the right thing to do, I think
Mhm.
he
Yeah.
said.
The journey from Tarbean to the university is... There are some things that happen. I think if we kind of encapsulate that pretty quickly and get to the meat of this, that's going to be in our best interest,
I think that's
especially because we've been having some technical
Yeah.
difficulties,
Yes.
I think
right?
the big thing that happens is he meets Denna,
Mm-hmm.
not Dennis. But
Not Dennis,
Dennis.
no. If you've been following us on Instagram,
Darn
Denna
you,
autocorrected
Yeah.
to Dennis. So
could have called me
he meets
Dennis.
Denna.
Yeah.
They pick up a...
Is it Josen? Was the
Joseph.
Josen,
He-
yeah.
He's kind of this.
He seems like a scumbag.
Just kind of a
maybe-
douchey.
Probably
Yeah.
a douche, yeah.
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 But not a noble son. But he's a musician or wants to be a musician. He's got a lute.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of flirting with Denna, and Kvothe is kind of angry about that because I think he's taken by her. And,
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing that happens, I think, is when Kvothe holds Josen's lute and just starts playing it, and blows everybody away with his ability. And
Didn't he play? I thought I remember saying something about. Was he playing 3 years at the seaside or?
it was something, but I think that he tried to say that he played his name or the name or
The
a
name,
wasn't
yes.
it? As music, and to me that was like the completion of his awakening from
Absolutely.
That he actually picked up an instrument and was able to play it again.
So I think the last thing before he gets off for the university is Denna tries to convince him to go with him and Joseph. Continue with us. You don't need to do this. And he almost does, but he doesn't. He's like, no, Chandrian, university. I have a goal.
I think there is something in there about the possibility of knowledge outweighed the possibility of love.
Right.
So
he's very calculated.
Yeah.
But as he gets off, he gets kind of the first glimpse of the university.
Right. As he's coming in.
Yeah.
Imre, and then the university's across the bridge.
Yep.
And the archives just towers above.
And
the university.
It's a beautiful picture, by the way.
It is, and it's up right now, and it's called Hopes, and it's by Mark Simonetti.
Okay.
And it's one of those where I was going through and looking for artwork that was just like, oh, this is really well done. It looks great, and it really gives you just this idea of how much of a monolith the university is.
Yeah, it's just such a structure, such a force within this.
Yeah.
Well, and they even talked about how important it was economically with like the number of glass blowers that were needed nearby.
And well, even apothecary, all the different crafts and things that they had there.
Yep.
So he.
Oh, and then I wrote down Kvothe's description of the university as he was walking in or seeing it, and he said it was ancient mammoth architecture scattered throughout the world, so old and so solidly built that they have become part of the landscape, and not a soul is wondering who built them or why. Just all these towering structures and monoliths, like you said.
Yeah, it's really good artwork, and Mr. Simonetti.
Kudos to you. That's an awesome job.
So if you're still listening, we are still having issues, and I apologize. So I think what we're going to do, in the hopes of maybe preserving some of this, is we're just going to keep it on this, so we use maybe a little less bit rate, and you guys can at least hear us. And then we will try to expedite the last part of this, even though it's the most interesting. If you haven't read this, please pick up the book and do that.
Because the next thing is his admission.
Well,
he tries to go to the archives.
He tries to go to the archives, and they're like, nope, you can't unless you're admitted. So he goes to admissions. And it's really like you sit in front of these, 9 masters? And then you make your case. You generally would have like a letter of recommendation type thing, and then they basically grill you for however long. And he says, I don't have a letter of recommendation. I was trained by Abenthy, and he's like, he tells him about the book, and one of the masters is like, well, I'm going to Tarbean in a little bit. I'll go to the pawn shop. I'll see if it's there. If it is, then cool. That kind of proves what you're saying is true. But he pretty much aces the admissions process. And halfway through, you find out that it was because he snuck in. He was able to sneak in and listen to all the other students or prospective students.
So he was able to anticipate.
So he was anticipating a lot of questions.
But then he ends the admissions by saying that he has no money to pay for tuition. But he makes the case that they should pay his tuition for him. He'll astound them with what he's able to do, and he will pay them back.
If you pay me 3 talents for the term, I will be the best student you've ever had, basically, is what he said. And they bought it.
Well, he didn't realize that
he didn't realize it at first, but he did.
But his tuition was less 3 talents.
Right.
So he ended up making money out of the deal.
Right. Yeah, he earned enough to have a room at the Muse and 3 meals a day there, and then get his supplies and.
Yeah. So.
And I did read that, so the terms, that was for his first term, a span is 10 days, and 4 span are in a month, so a month in this world is 40 days, and a term is 2 months. So it's basically, the term is 80 days for that. That's what he was able to pay for, was his first term at the university.
Yeah. So after he's admitted, he's got his room, he's got his board. He meets somebody named Simon.
Yep.
And he kind of shows him around, and they go to the mess, and they get some food, and Simon introduces him to a couple of his friends. And he tries to go into the archive again, but his name's not in the book yet.
It's not yet.
Because you have to be a student to be...
Right.
And this was his first run-in with Ambrose, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a student kind of manning the desk in front of the...
He's kind of a despicable noble son.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So this is my second time reading through, and I'm just like, oh, this guy.
Yeah. I hate this guy.
Yeah. I hope all of you are still enjoying the picture of the university, by the way.
But that's just part of the beauty of the story, is that you have characters that you love and you have characters that you definitely hate, and he's one of them.
But there's a line in there, too, that I can't remember exactly what he says. I don't know if I wrote it down, but it was... Ambrose basically just, tries to embarrass him, tries to humiliate him, but Kvothe kind of embraces it, that it makes him feel comfortable somehow. Because
it makes him realize that this is just like Tarbean. There are still assholes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he knows how to deal with assholes.
Yeah.
Or he thinks he does.
Yeah. His arrogance gets the best of him more than once.
Right.
Sure.
Speaking of arrogance, one of the masters from the admissions,
Hemi.
Master Hemi, teaches
sympathy.
Sympathy, I think.
Yeah, because that's what.
And so Kvothe goes to his first lecture, and it's like, oh, this is all stuff I already know. And he tries to talk to Hemi afterwards, and he's like, well, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Then
blows him off.
Yeah, the next class he goes in and he sits closer to the front because he wants to talk to him after class, or talk before class maybe.
Yeah, it was. I think he talked to him before class.
Or he wanted to.
Well,
and
I thought that's what Hemi
showed
basically
up,
said.
like on time, like right on time. And he's like, "Oh, you, class, Kvothe's gonna provide a lecture today." Just like trying to
put him on the spot,
embarrass him and make him fail. But I think the opposite happens.
Yeah, Kvothe is able to demonstrate the principles of sympathy quite well. He creates, I think it was a simulacra, I think he called it, basically like a voodoo doll out of wax of Hemi, and he is able to get Hemi to give him a lock or a strand of his hair to do the binding, and he basically burns Hemi's foot and makes Hemi look like a fool by the end of the class, which... we're not going to go beyond this chapter tonight, but it leads to some ramifications that happen in the very next chapter that we'll cover in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So, there's some fallout from this, both good and bad. So.
Yep. It was fun to read this chapter, though.
Yeah. This one's one of my favorites. Yeah. And going back and forth, it just... Yeah. The way he sets it up, and he realizes that it's basically another stage, and that he's able to perform, and really captures the audience and knows how to project. And I think there's a lot of elements in here that just kind of he's back in his element, really, and able to act and demonstrate.
Right. Yeah. So, good place to stop it, especially since we've been having some issues. So I'm going to flip this back to our camera so people can see our faces before we leave. So we will be back in 2 weeks. We will do our best to resolve the technical issues that have been plaguing us for the last 25 minutes. I have some ideas. And we will... Yeah, we're gonna cover the next section of the book.
Yep. So this will be a lot of his time at the university.
Yep.
And...
and beyond. We actually got a precursor for what happens in the first